have a lot of material to cover today. Thank you so much for joining us for our final presentation in our training series for CASFA this year. This one is called Solving the Financial Aid Puzzle, Financial Aid 102. Some housekeeping items. Since we are a small group, we're going to go ahead and let you ask questions as they come up as we're presenting. We have a moderator, who will be Whitney, and she's online as CASFA user. And all you need to do to ask a question is raise your hand and she'll call on you. You can also feel free to put your question in the chat function and then she can read your question. And again, we can go over questions kind of as we go through the materials since it will be fresh and relevant in everyone's mind as we go through. So again, thank you so much for coming. My name is Danielle Sullivan and I'm the Financial Aid Advising Supervisor at Johnson County Community College. And I've been in financial aid for about 20 years, working in various capacities. So I'm happy to be joining you all today. My co-presenter is Courtney Lockhart.
Awesome. Thank you. My name is Courtney Lockhart, as Danielle mentioned. I am the Assistant Director of Student Services and Outreach in the Office of Financial Aid here at Wichita State University. So I've been in financial aid since about 2014. And I've been working at Wichita State, so I've been in higher education since 2003. So I've had some great experiences. So we will go ahead and get started. All right, so as Danielle mentioned, today we're going to be putting together a puzzle. Hopefully at the end of this presentation, you will have a lot of tools, techniques, and information to help you be successful counselors and to help you assist students. So we'll be covering all the topics on the right. I won't read them for you. So we'll start out with, what does the FAFSA do? So submitting the FAFSA pretty much guarantees that a student who is eligible for federal aid will be able to be considered for that aid at a given institution. So the FAFSA takes into consideration all household and income information that a student may enter into a particular application. They submit that to the school, and then the school is able to determine, based upon that application, the types and amounts of financial aid that students are eligible to receive. So it comes down to a simple formula, which is the cost of attendance, which is the cost of attending any particular school. We subtract out what's called the EFC, or the expected family contribution value, which is determined based upon that household and income information that's entered on the FAFSA. And it equals the financial need, which is how institutions determine various types of grant and gift aid that students may be eligible to receive, or if they're only able to receive loans, for instance. And pardon us, we might have a slight delay with the presentation itself. All right. Oh. Okay. Sorry, we thought we had all the kinks worked out, but the slide does not function as well with multiple individuals. We're going to get through it though. So once the FAFSA is submitted, once you see your confirmation page, that confirmation page is very useful. It'll also be emailed to the student's email address that they've entered on the application. But on that confirmation page, it'll tell the student whether or not their FAFSA will be processed at the institution, or if there's additional information that they'll need to submit to the school or to FAFSA, the customer service itself. It'll tell them whether or not the FAFSA, the application has been rejected for various reasons. It'll tell them whether there are C code issues, which are issues that the system is not matching up the application because it runs it through various federal databases. And so it'll tell them whether or not there are issues there. And it'll also tell them whether or not they've been selected for a process called verification. And so 1 out of every 3 applications that is submitted to any institution is selected for this process called verification. So touching on more about the rejected FAFSA itself. Once the FAFSA has been submitted, it leads to that EFC value, which is what a school uses to determine a student's financial need. So unfortunately, if a FAFSA is rejected, then an EFC won't be calculated. Okay, so the student will need to follow some additional steps and submit additional documentation to the school in order for them to be able to process that FAFSA and in order for an EFC to be calculated at the school side. Once the school is calculated, they send the documentation up to the federal government. They process those documents, they process and finalize those steps, and then they send it back to the institution so a student can receive a financial aid award offer. Bear with me just a second. Okay, so additionally, for the information that is submitted or that is visible on the confirmation page of the FAFSA itself, once it's been submitted, it'll also be available in the student's SAR or their student aid report. And so this will be emailed to them as well. And they will have access to see if there's some information that's not aligning or matching up with the Social Security Administration or the other federal websites, the other federal databases that the FAFSA is processed through once it's submitted. It'll also let them know here that they'll need to make corrections and to get with the institution. And again, apologizing for the delay, for the lag. And then those on the SARs, they'll be able to see if there are issues or the C codes, as we had mentioned before. Those will be visible, and it'll give the students information about what they need to submit with the institution and what information they'll need to provide based upon the information that they put on the FAFSA itself. All right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about verification. I'm sure when working with your high school students, you come across this quite a bit where a student might be selected for verification at their college, and you might be the ones helping them through this process and helping them get their paperwork to the school. So what I want to say about verification is it doesn't mean you did anything wrong. Also, it's not an audit. The federal government has a formula that they use to try to select FAFSAs for basically quality assurance to make sure that the FAFSA is actually reflecting the student and parent financial situation. So the way that we do this is the school is responsible for carrying out the verification, and they will obtain certain documents from the student in order to verify that their FAFSA is correct. Now, the most important thing to see if a student is selected for verification, it will be on their student aid report or SAR. We like acronyms in financial aid, so everything seems to have an acronym. This is the SAR. And as Courtney showed you before, that's also where issues with social security numbers will show up, like if their social didn't match their actual social security card or their name doesn't match, or they didn't register for selective service. All of those things show up on this student aid report, including verification. So it says on this student aid report, your FAFSA has been selected for a review process called verification, and it's going to go all to the school, these documents. Student will never mail them to the Department of Education. And then another kind of insider tip is that if the EFC has an asterisk by it, that means that that FAFSA is selected for verification. So you can always ask the student, does it have a little star thing by the 0 or by the EFC? And that's another indicator that the student is selected. Now, once a student is selected, they can't be unselected. So it can, in some cases, prohibit a student from finalizing their financial aid file, because once we have selected you, we can't unselect you, and the student does have to finish verification. So I know that this can be a problem for some families if they have issues getting tax documents, or we've run into cases where students' parents don't file taxes, and you can send all of those issues to the school. So generally speaking, how does a student complete verification? So some schools are going to collect materials via an online portal where the student authenticates by signing in. They might mail documents to the school. They can drop them off in person. And students and parents can be asked to verify a variety of things. The most important piece of information and tip I can give you is that make sure students use the IRS data retrieval tool while filling out the FAFSA. This really streamlines and simplifies the amount of documentation they have to submit. As long as they use the IRS data retrieval tool, in some cases, schools do not need to collect tax returns. It'll eliminate that entirely. So if they are eligible to use it, please do. But generally speaking, we're going to be verifying their income, household size, number in college, and then if they don't file taxes, income earned from work, how many live in their household, and number in college. Generally speaking, that's what we're looking for. So what kinds of documents will a student need to be turning in? So it is school specific, and schools all have their own processes by which they complete verification. Most schools may have you submit a worksheet where you fill out some information about your household size, number in college, and then it may need a parent signature if they had to put their parent on the FAFSA. And then again, we'll need copies of all filed tax returns and schedules. The IRS data retrieval tool can eliminate this. And then W-2s if you didn't file taxes, and then to verify that you didn't have to file taxes, maybe you made under the income threshold and you were not legally required to file a tax return, we may need that as well. And then another really cool thing, let's say a student is selected for verification and they did not use the data retrieval tool, they can actually go back into their FAFSA on a second transaction and use the IRS data retrieval tool the second time if they're having a hard time getting documents in. So if they qualify, if they didn't use it the first time around, they can actually go back, make a correction to their FAFSA, and use that data retrieval tool. Is this still me, Courtney? Okay, thank you. So what's next? So once the FAFSA gets submitted, what do we actually do with that information? So the FAFSA determines your EFC, or your expected family contribution. And after that's determined, the school will then set up a budget for the student, also known as the cost of attendance. So included in this would be things you normally think of: tuition and fees, books and supplies, room and board, so residence hall, off-campus apartment, sorority, fraternity, those kinds of living situations. It also includes transportation expenses to get to and from school, and then a personal and miscellaneous budget because you need things throughout the year to live. And then some additional costs could be a computer purchase, or if you have children and need childcare, disability expenses, and study abroad. And we call EFC one of the building blocks along with cost of attendance. There really are two building blocks of financial aid, because without them, we can't determine how needy a student is and determine their financial need, which we'll talk about later, what kind of aid is considered a need-based piece of aid. So these are our two building blocks that are important in terms of financial aid.
All right.
So let's talk about,
sorry.
oh, I'm sorry, one more slide. Yeah, we're experimenting with remote share right now. So thank you all so much for bearing with us. It's a learning process. So let's talk about direct costs and indirect costs. So direct costs are going to be things that the university or college bills you directly on your bill. So things you pay directly to the college, such as tuition and fees, on-campus room and board. Um, Bookstore costs could be direct or not. It depends at the school. Maybe parking permits, and then indirect costs are going to be not billed by the school. So there are things that are going to happen throughout the year that you're not going to get a bill for by the school. That can include books if you have to purchase those without financial aid, or off-campus room and board, your transportation costs, and personal or miscellaneous expenses. And your school's cost of attendance includes both direct and indirect costs because they want to give you a picture of what it actually costs to live for 9 months in Wichita and go to school for 9 months at WSU. So they're going to be including everything that it costs for that 9-month period to be enrolled in fall and spring and go to school. So it's going to include both of those. And then students can really cut their costs by managing the indirect costs of their cost of attendance. We're going to go over some award letters later, or financial aid offers later, and show you those indirect costs. But now I'll turn it back over to Courtney to go over the types of aid.
All right, perfect. So of course, oh, we love this.
Yep, back one more. There we go.
Okay, all right. So of course, what's important in understanding college costs are the ways to meet those college costs. And so really it's split up into two different types of aid. So we have gift aid, which are oftentimes free money, free resources that are available to students just because they're a student at that institution or in that state or in that county or something like that. And then self-help aid. Some types of self-help aid students will have to, they will have to earn. And then other types, they will have to borrow and repay, such as loans. So when we're looking at the gift aid, of course, grants and scholarships. Grants first, they have federal grants that are available, state as well as institutional grants. Now, these grant opportunities are going to come based upon the students submitting that FAFSA. So upon completion of the FAFSA, then the schools will be able to determine a student's eligibility for these different grants. Now, when it comes to scholarships, some scholarships may require that a student complete the FAFSA, or they may require that a student show some type of financial need, which is also done by completing the FAFSA and having that EFC value calculated that we discussed earlier. But other scholarships do not require necessarily for students to complete the FAFSA. So there may be scholarships that are available at the school, at the institutional level. There are private outside scholarships that students may apply for within their community, or various organizations, professional organizations maybe, that students and their parents or their families have access to. So they may be bringing in oftentimes outside scholarships from their church, community organizations, things like that, or even scholarships that are available through the state. Now, in considering self-help aid, work study it's an awesome opportunity for students to be able to work on campus, and to be able to, have a little bit of flexibility with their work schedule when it comes to them being considered as students, because they are considered a student first and they're considered a scholar first. So any opportunity that students have to work on campus, their employer is going to work around their final schedule, and they're going to work around their course schedule. And that's going to be different, at certain institutions. The work study programs may be a little bit differently. They may have opportunities for students to work on campus. They may also have opportunities for students to work off campus. And then for loans, there are really three types of loans that are available to students and families that are federal. So that are offered by the government, that are able to be consolidated and things like that. And those are the subsidized and unsubsidized loans. that are offered to students, and then the parent loan. So those are loans that parents can borrow on behalf of the student. And then that option that you see on the bottom, the private loans, those are also options for both students and parents that they can borrow. We always make it a point to have a conversation with the families before they consider private loans. There are some times that private loans may benefit a family better than a federal loan. Maybe their interest rate can be a lot lower because they're with the military, or they have an in um, with a financial institution or something like that, and maybe they can get a better interest rate. But most times you're going to get the better deal out of a federal direct loan. And so that's oftentimes what we're advising to families. And oh, it always skips one on me. Okay. All right. So also, when it comes to evaluating these financial aid award packages that Danielle mentioned, we will go over here in just a bit. You always want to consider a few things when it comes to, okay, what choice am I going to make as a family? So these are the conversations, of course, that you'll have with your students. You'll want to have them evaluate each of their college award offers so they can see kind of compare apples to apples, if you will. You wouldn't compare maybe a Wichita State to a Harvard, for example, because they're completely different as far as the educational and the league that they're in. So really giving them that information, have them check whatever resources are available to them, which we will also review toward the end of the presentation, like a college scorecard, where they are able to compare college costs and college earnings, where they're able to see the debt levels of students that graduate from those particular institutions. Because many times it's going to depend on what program a student can go into. That will determine, how much they want to borrow, how much debt they want to take on, how much it's going to cost them to attend that institution, for example. And then, of course, ask these questions that are important for everyone to know. How much of the financial aid is renewable? And then what are the criteria based upon for that renewability? Also, how much of the package is gift aid? After all the gift aid, what are my out-of-pocket expenses, for example? How much of a loan do I need to borrow? What are the types of loans that are available to me at this institution? Just some things that they'll want to keep in mind. Even comparing scholarships, how much is the scholarship going to offer me the first year compared to my consecutive years as I finish my degree there? And then are the scholarships private? Are there additional scholarships I can apply for? All of these things are things that we want to keep in mind when it comes to evaluating these financial aid award offers. Back to you, Danielle.
Thank you. So let's look at 3 schools with the same EFC, because your EFC does not change between school to school. It's going to be the same at Wichita State, Johnson County, Butler, Barton, Harvard. It's going to stay the same at every single school. So when a student has an EFC of 1,000, like in our example, if you look at the entire cost and you subtract the EFC, it's going to show you how much financial need a student may have at that school. So you can see that as you change institutions, a student's financial need will go up because the EFC stays the same, but the cost of attendance does not. And we're going to dissect this because if you just look at this, you would say, oh, wow, private university, I don't want to go there. I'm out of pocket $44,000. But that's not necessarily true because schools are going to be putting together an offer for the student that has grants, scholarships, loans, and all of their financial aid options within that offer. And also, some of these are indirect costs, which you can minimize, and some of these are actual direct costs. So it's a good idea to kind of split it up and look at direct costs differently than indirect costs. But I wanted to at least, we wanted to show you an example of how the EFC doesn't change, and it can give a student a lot more financial need. So if a student is at a private institution, they've got $44,000 they could potentially get in need-based aid, which means scholarships, grants, need-based loans, things like that. Okay, let's take a look at a real life example. This financial aid offer is actually from Barton Community College. This is a real live financial aid offer. So we can go through this kind of example with you. So some schools bill on-campus cost and off-campus costs. So in some of our examples, you're going to see two sets of numbers. One example if a student lives off campus and one example if a student lives on campus. But in this example, you'll see right at the top, the estimated cost of attendance for Barton is $17,930, and that's for 2 semesters, fall and spring. Summer is usually done separately, so whenever we're looking at financial aid offers, it's important to remember it's fall and spring, and summer is generally not included. So essentially 9 months. What does it cost to attend for 9 months? It breaks out the tuition and fees. It also tells you this is based on full-time enrollment. So tuition and fees are broken out, books and supplies. And then they do a really nice thing here where they actually say estimated direct costs paid to Barton and estimated indirect costs paid to potentially a third party. So personal expenses, that's like your shampoo and your laundry detergent, transportation to and from school. And then it's going to give you an estimate on living expenses like on campus or off campus living expenses. So Barton has an example of $8,660 for the estimate on how much it's going to cost for room and board essentially. And then their total grants and scholarships is $5,045. That's from the Pell Grant because it says Pell Grant right there. So what will you pay out of pocket for 1 year gives you an estimate of $12,885. But we're not done because that's just the free money. Now, if they're eligible for loans, which it looks like they are according to this offer, they could potentially get $4,500 in a subsidized loan and $2,000 in an unsubsidized loan for a total of $6,500 to pay towards their tuition and fees. So we can already kind of chisel down this factor. But if I were working with this student, what I would tell them is you need a minimum of $13,760 for your billable costs if you live on campus. And I've got the numbers broken out on the right-hand side. So the student really needs a minimum of their direct costs because if they work at an on-campus job through work study or they're working another job, they can gradually pay those other expenses potentially out of pocket throughout the year. So it's most important for the student to be able to meet their billable costs. And Barton also offers a payment plan. So some schools might also offer that option for a payment plan. Um, One other thing I want to stress is that work study does not apply to your bill. So oftentimes when schools send out these offers, the work study portion won't be usually subtracted from the charges because you get an on-campus job and you work, and most of the times tuition is due before classes start or during the first month classes start, and it would be impossible for the student to work that much to be able to pay their bill by the deadline. So that's a job you have throughout the year. And so just pay attention to that when you see work study, don't subtract that from the direct charges. Okay, here is another example from another community college in the state of Kansas. This is from Seward County Community College down in the southwest corner of the state. So in this example, they have tuition and fees broken out, housing and meals, and it looks like they only allow off-campus living, which means they probably don't have residence halls. So there is going to be no on-campus room and board, which means that the school's not going to charge for that. So this student, their whole estimate based on books, fees, tuition, transportation, living expenses is about $15,007 per year. But again, these are indirect and direct costs. So what I would tell students is that you need to have at least $3,616 in financial aid because those are the billable costs for this community college. So this student is also receiving grants in the amount of $2,890 per year. They're getting the Pell Grant. So really, after you subtract their Pell Grant from what they're actually going to be billed, they're only going to owe about $718. Even though you see that $12,000 figure circled, those are the indirect costs for housing. So if they get a job and they're working, they can gradually pay for those expenses. But bare minimum, the student would need enough to cover at least their billable costs. So these are our two community college examples. Let's move to a four-year school. This is Fort Hays State University. a little bit out west. Their total cost of attendance is about $19,138, and this includes tuition and fees, books, room and board, transportation, and personal. And again, they have off-campus and on-campus options. So if a student lives on campus, the bill is going to look a lot different than if the student lives on campus. I can tell by this financial aid offer that their parent or guardian works at the university, because you can see Fort Hays State University dependent tuition assistance. So that's another great way to save costs. If you work for an institution and you send your student to that same institution, you might be able to get some tuition assistance. I know Johnson County offers it as well. And I think we just pay your whole tuition. So it can be a really good deal if you send your student to the institution that you work at. And so in this example, they're also getting some gift aid, the Pell Grant, and then the Kansas Comprehensive Grant, which is only for state of Kansas residents. They've also been offered some student loans. They were probably offered a parent loan, but they went ahead and declined it. That's why they're sitting at zero. And they're getting a ton of scholarships. They're getting leadership studies, post-rock region FHSU Tiger Scholar, and then again, that dependent tuition assistance. And so I would tell this student in our on-campus example, they would need at least $14,700 because of those are their billable costs to be able to cover. And they've got about half of that in gift aid. And so they would need to come up with that additional money through either loans or payment plan to be able to make this an affordable option for them. Okay, now I'm going to turn it back over to Courtney.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so this happens to be my home institution, so Wichita State University. So just to kind of break down things here, so there's actually 2 pages to the letter. The other page is not shown, but it also offers direct links for students to be able to go and see maybe where some additional resources and things like that are offered, and also where a student can go if they have questions about this particular award offer. So this student was offered in total 11,000. So this happens to be Woo Shuk, so he's our mascot. And of course, we found it appropriate to make an award offer for him. So Woo Shuk is being offered 11,325. So he's got a scholarship, work study, that's being offered. And once again, as Danielle had mentioned, that's not subtracted from the direct costs. That's not subtracted to be totaled in what it will cost the student to attend there, because of course they have to work for that. They have to earn those funds. And then he's been offered both subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So the amount of the loan will tell me, so that's $7,500. So that tells me that he is a dependent student and that he is a junior or a senior, because of the amount that he's being offered there. The cost of attendance there, so it seems like he only has tuition and fees. So he is actually not living on campus for this example. So after all the financial aid has been applied, it looks like that negative amount there implies that he's going to be receiving a refund of sorts. And so that's something that we would definitely advise the students. If you are anticipating a refund based upon the letter that you receive, they'll want to set up an e-refund account, which they can do in their student account through their student portal. Now, other things that they'll want to consider are, of course, those indirect costs, so books and supplies, transportation, personal expenses, and all the things listed there. So those would total about $9,800, so $9,870. And so those are definitely costs that students won't have to pay directly, but there'll be fees that they incur throughout the year, as Danielle mentioned. So this particular student, the cost of attendance is kind of a range from about $23,512 to $25,363. And that's just depending upon if there's some major fees and things like that that are applied there. You see a breakdown of the cost of attendance and what all that includes. Of course, if they are staying on campus, they're not also getting charged off campus. And if they're staying off campus, of course, that's not considered in their direct costs. Okay, so according to this example, if they were living off campus, then they would subtract that $15.75 in gift aid, and this would be their cost. So $65.28 would be the cost that they would need to meet after their gift aid has been accepted. Okay, just waiting on the slide to transition on my end. All right, perfect. So here's another example, Bethany College. So, oh, okay.
It likes to skip ahead.
Yes. Oh, no.
Back too.
And I think there's a signal delay.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Okay, so you see Bethany College on there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I still see Sterling on my end, but maybe it's just delayed. Okay, there we go. Perfect. So this is an award offer for Bethany College. So this is also a four-year institution. And as you see, their cost of attendance is a little bit higher, but then they also have some institutional funds that they have awarded. So they have the Bethany Award and then the Bethany Grant, which some of the institutions are able to do based upon their cost of attendance, based upon maybe their foundation, and based upon some donation funds that they have that are being offered to them. So this student has kind of a plethora of awards that they have received, both from the institution as well as federal. And then they have a federal work study offer as well. So their cost of attendance, which as noted here, does not include their transportation or personal expenses. So it doesn't take into account their indirect costs as far as this totaled amount there. So their $31,214 is their tuition and fees. Then they have their books, which is typical for a year, about $1,250 is what we tell students to budget for an academic year. And then $8,400 to $14,200 would be for on-campus charges. And as with any institution, more than likely that's going to be based upon their room selection. And of course, what amenities that they opt to have. So as we see a breakdown here, they do a nice job of breaking down what those costs are going to be, those direct costs, as well as what their estimated financial aid is going to be. So a student is able to see from semester to semester, and then for the total year, what they're going to have to come out of pocket for. And then along the right side, you see their detailed charges, what those estimates are going to be. Now, many times this is going to be made available to them before the state finalizes what the costs are actually going to be. So they just make educated guesses and just add maybe a 2 to 3% increase from the previous years. So that way families have a more accurate picture of what they're going to be paying, for the upcoming academic year, because those charges may not yet be available to them.
Oh, real quick, on that Bethany Award letter, I wanted to point out that they had something on their financial aid offer that said emotional support animal charge fee, like under other charges. So, and I don't work at Bethany. We got this from a good colleague of ours. So I don't know what that means, but it is part of their other charges if you have probably an emotional support animal in the residence hall with you. I thought that was interesting. It's the first one I've seen.
Mine too. All right, let's see. Technology is our friend until it isn't. All right. So Sterling College. So we see how And we've seen how different institutions offer it according to how their students are familiar, with their process, and according to how they've actually grown and learned their student population and found to best relay that information to them. And so here we see Sterling College for James Doe. We see the academic investment, which is their tuition and fees, which is pretty much their cost of attendance. So that's going to be the academic investment as well as the living estimated expenses combined. So we see the tuition and fees, that investment. Then we see the room, the meal plan, which is of course based upon their selection as well. The selection that they made when they signed up for it. So they've incorporated all of that together. And then they have the total of what the academic investment and the living expenses are for them to better understand what those costs are going to be for them. We have gift aid, which they have seem to have a collegiate award, something that they've won from the institution. They have a football scholarship, so it's an athletic scholarship. Then you have some grants, so the federal Pell Grant as well as the SEOG grant. So their total gift aid is $22,000. Then they have their loan options. So this $5,500 here tells me that that's an incoming freshman, because freshmen are only allowed to borrow $5,500 in their first year, because the federal government doesn't want them to start out in debt. And so we really push scholarships and family commitment when we go out to our various locations to do presentations and things like that. So students can understand, you're offered loans, and it's important if it's an investment, for you. But if you don't have to borrow loans, rely on those scholarships, rely on those gift aid when they are applicable to your family. And so they give some good bottom line costs with expenses, minus the amount of financial aid, and then what they would be looking at paying out of pocket, which they call the bottom line total. And so with this particular one, their cost of attendance does not include transportation and miscellaneous expenses, but it does include like books and on-campus room and board. So if we're looking at this 37,139, when we're subtracting the gift aid, the 15,000 is what they're looking at paying after all the gift aid has been applied. After selecting the loans, then it's about 9,500, not taking into account the federal work study, which they will earn. And then they go on just to break down what those awards are going to be per semester. All right, and we will actually share this one, but I'll give you back the remote access because it likes you better, Danielle.
It does. I'm sorry. Okay, before we go on though, Courtney brought up a really good point that I'd like to touch on. He was saying that some schools don't know their costs because the state has to essentially approve those costs. So I wanted to let you all know that all of our state schools, so that would be Fort Hays State, Wichita State, Pitt State, um, K-State, University of Kansas, and even Washburn, even though they're a municipal college, and I know I'm leaving one out, ESU, Emporia State University. Those are all state schools, and the Kansas Board of Regents has to actually approve their tuition. So when all of these schools send out the financial aid offer with the cost of attendance, it is just an estimate. They essentially have to figure out, and Courtney said 2 to 3% increase usually, and they send that out. But when the student starts in the summertime, their costs could actually be different because the Board of Regents generally does not finalize tuition until June. And so it's kind of like waiting on pins and needles when you're at a state school to figure out, are we close to our estimate? Are we off? When I used to work at KU, one year we were off on the out of state. They wanted to keep in-state the same. And so they raised out of state more than what we had expected. And so we had to redo a lot of stuff and it was not fun. So just know that from those types of schools, tuition really is just an estimate, but at your community colleges and your private institutions, usually those are set a different way. Private schools set them very early on, and so their tuition probably isn't going to change. But community colleges could or could not, depending on the type, in your state schools, definitely. So thank you for bringing that up, Courtney.
Absolutely.
So I'll let you start with can we negotiate? And we're each going to talk about our various schools in this process.
All right. So when it's asking about negotiations that can be made, it may take into consideration, like the examples here, a 23 ACT with a 4.0 scholarship, and maybe they weren't eligible for a merit or institutional award, institutional scholarship based upon not meeting the criteria for a 24 ACT with a 3.5 GPA minimum. And so these negotiations that it's asking about, it really depends on the institution. I know at Wichita State, it's on a case-by-case basis, and there's not a general rule that says, oh, if you didn't meet it, but you were close, we'll still consider you. It's really on a case-by-case basis, based upon the students' the student scores, the students' involvement. If they contact us, many times we have families that'll contact us because they were maybe 1 point off, as you see here in this example, or maybe they just missed the deadline by 1 day, or something like that, which is tough. Those are difficult conversations that you have to have, especially if the funds have already all been allocated to other students, by this deadline. And so really on a case-by-case basis, we'll have these conversations with families.
And at a community college level, we don't generally have as much money to play with. And also, the donors are very specific on what type of student they want to give to, or what kind of money they want to give to a student. And so it's a little bit harder at the community college to negotiate. I would say the one place you probably could might be athletics, potentially negotiate there. When I was working at the University of Kansas, we would have lots of situations where a student was just 1 point off, and we did have a scholarship appeal process for that if they had some kind of mitigating or unusual circumstance, or they wanted us to consider something else. But just, like WSU, they were a public institution and had very finite amount of money and a budget that they have to adhere to. And so exceptions just can't be granted to everyone. Now, private institutions have more money to kind of play with. And so if you go to a private institution with a financial aid offer from another school, they might want to beat it or match it at least to try to get you to come to their school. So sometimes students might have more luck at a private institution, but I don't always want to say that because you just never know without asking. So I would encourage your students to reach out to the school they're interested in and just to try to at least ask about the process on getting a scholarship to see if they might be eligible to do that. All right, so the next one is special circumstances, and we did a panel, 2 panels, discussions about this in the fall semester through Zoom. I don't know if you may have joined that, but for those of you who are new to this, if the FAFSA does not accurately reflect a student's financial circumstances, sometimes the student can bring in documents to show the financial aid administrator, like a loss of income, especially now with COVID, people losing their jobs or receiving unemployment. The number of these types of appeals have increased. So a student can always go to their financial aid officer and say, my parents got divorced, or my mom is also enrolled in school, or we have these medical expenses because I was hospitalized, or I've lost my job, or my parent has lost their job. And the financial aid administrator can take a look at their situation and basically redo their FAFSA on certain elements. And we do this at Johnson County Community College. It's pretty rare because we're a pretty low cost institution, but we will do all of these types of adjustments that I mentioned for a student.
So at Wichita State University, we also do each of these three types of adjustments based upon a professional judgment. I thought it definitely beneficial to note, not every institution has to take into consideration special circumstances, but if they do not, it has to be well outlined within their policies on their website and everything, why or that they do not take into consideration special circumstances for a professional judgment. And then students go from there with whatever circumstances, working with that financial aid institution that they can. But at Wichita State and most of the Kansas schools, you're going to find that there are opportunities available for professional judgments.
And the other realm of professional judgment is when a student um, cannot provide their parents information. So there's some kind of circumstance in their life and they're not able to get their parent to sign the FAFSA to provide their information. So I wanted to briefly cover that just because you're not claimed as a dependent on your parents' tax returns does not equal grounds to submit your FAFSA without your parents' information. You have to meet very specific criteria, such as being married yourself, having children of your own, military, orphan, ward of the court, emancipated minor, homeless, um, in legal guardianship, things like that. If you can answer yes, foster care, then you don't have to provide your parents' information. But if you don't really fit those scenarios, but let's say you have a circumstance where you don't know where your parents or they are kind of in and out of your life, you can take your situation to your financial aid advisor and just discuss it with them, and then they can help you figure out if you can submit the FAFSA without their information by writing a letter and get third-party documentation, and it's what we call a dependency override. So we also do allow these at Johnson County Community College, and we'll send an email out to a student if they didn't provide their parent information to encourage them to set up an appointment with us so we can talk about their individual situation.
And to piggyback on that really quick, Danielle, we also do the dependency overrides, but it may be worth mentioning that some families have actually, we do these presentations. We used to do them a lot more frequently pre-pandemic, but even in giving these presentations, a lot of families have questions. Well, if I just move my senior out of the house, after they graduate, then can they be considered independent? And of course, all the things that Danielle mentioned, if they don't meet that criteria, then they definitely don't want to just move them out of the house or take them off of their taxes or something like that, because more times than not, with them being in college, that's going to be a tax break for the families. And moving them out of the house is just going to provide an additional expense that they may not have calculated for, because it's not going to allow them to be considered an independent student.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, generally until you're 24, even if you live in California and your parents live in New York, you still have to be considered dependent and have to provide your parents' information. So, if your student goes to college out in California, they're still considered part of the household and they would still have to put their parents on the FAFSA. The other thing with this process is that you don't want to ever let students just try to do this on their own. They really need to connect with a financial aid administrator to help walk them through the processes so we can tell them what to submit, how to submit it. And also, every school is different. So we don't do things the same way that WSU does things, and they don't do things the same way that Barton does things. So every school is going to be very different in the process and may ask for different types of documentation. Courtney, anything to add to that?
No, I think you've covered it there.
All right. Before we strap ourselves in for loans, I want to see if anyone has any questions up until this point about anything we've covered. You can raise your hand or just put it in the chat. No questions. Okay, well, we'll keep going then. I'm going to talk to you about student loans because we get a lot of questions about student loans. It's something that students don't quite know a lot about. Also, parents might not because they didn't take out student loans. Kind of is a little bit of an enigma. So I wanted to break down kind of the student loan process for you all. So first of all, Courtney mentioned earlier that the federal government loans three types of loans: federal direct subsidized loans, federal direct unsubsidized loans, and Parent Plus loans. We're going to start with the student loans. So the two types of student loans that the government will lend is a subsidized loan, which means no interest accrues while the student is in school. And then there's the unsubsidized portion where interest does accrue for the lifetime of the loan. However, I want to stress both loans do not require any repayment until 6 months after a student graduates, leaves school, or drops below half-time. Yes, you have to pay back your loans if you don't finish school. Yes, you have to pay back your loans if you only go one semester. So that doesn't matter. If you borrow a loan, you have to pay it back no matter what. and they're really hard to forgive in bankruptcy. So we're always talking to students about smart borrowing, making sure you understand your costs very well. Now, the current interest rate is amazing. You know, they haven't been this low in years. So it's 2.75% this year, which is incredibly low. Origination fees is kind of the government's fee to apply. So when you take out a student loan, the government will take out a fee for processing administration on the cost of the loan program. So automatically about 1% of the loan is considered loan fees. And that's pretty typical when you're looking at borrowing loans like mortgages, car loans, that kind of thing. There are loan fees. And then if you're a first time borrower, the government wants to make sure you know kind of what you're doing. So after, you've accepted your loan through your school, you have to go on to studentaid.gov and complete loan entrance counseling. And it walks you through kind of a little quiz. It walks you through what a loan is, and then it asks you questions as you go to make sure you're paying attention. It takes about 30 minutes to complete if you read everything. It's hard to click past things. I've seen students try and they have to go back and answer the questions. So it does at least try to make you answer some of the questions. And then you sign a wonderful contract called a master promissory note. And this is the same thing if you go into a bank and borrow a loan, you sign on the dotted line. That's what this is. And it's good for 10 years. So the student does not have to do it every single year. But new for this year, the student will have to sign an annual student loan acknowledgement. And that's just because the master promissory note lasts 10 years. So once you do that, and once you do the entrance counseling, all you have to do if you go to WSU to get a loan is click accept in the system, and boom, you've got it. This is a way that the student will have to actually go online, see their loan balance looking them right back in the face before they say, yes, I want this other loan. So it's a way to make sure the student is very cognizant and mindful of the amount of loans they're borrowing throughout their college career. And then loans go directly to the school. So if you borrow it, it doesn't go to you and then you pay your school. It's going to go directly to pay your bill. And then if there's anything excess, that's when the refund would go to you, the student, if it pays your whole bill. Now, once the loan is applied to your bill, it will be assigned to a loan servicer who will then be responsible for providing you with updates. So WSU isn't going to be emailing you about paying your student loan. It's going to be a federal servicer. And right now there are 13 different servicers, and they do try to assign your student loan to the same company, essentially. So like a Mohila or Fedloan Servicing, and they don't try to change that on you. They try to keep it the same so that all of your student loans are in the same place. And there are many different repayment options and even some forgiveness options depending on what kind of career you pursue.
It appears we may have frozen. Danielle, are you there? Courtney, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I'm
Okay.
sorry, I was
I'm
on
not
mute.
sure. I think Danielle might have frozen on us.
Yes, I think so. Let me see if I can.
There you are, Danielle. Are you back with us?
My internet had a hiccup. Let's go back. Okay. Okay. Can you see that?
There we go.
Courtney, okay,
Yep, I'm here.
great. There we go. Okay. What was the last thing you heard me say?
I think you had finished up with the previous slide, the first slide on loans.
Okay. Did you hear me talking about the loan limits?
No, not yet.
Okay, I'll start this whole thing over. So Courtney had mentioned earlier when we were going through financial aid offers that he could tell if a student was a first year, second year, third year, fourth year. And that's because there are loan limits for freshmen, second year, juniors, and seniors. So if you're a dependent student, that means you do not, or that means you do have to put your parents on the FAFSA. You have a lower loan limit because as a dependent student, your parent can borrow a parent loan. If you're an independent student, that means that your parents are not on your FAFSA and you're on your own kind of, and you get higher loan limits. So if you're a first year student and you're a freshman, you can get 5,500 for dependent and 9,500 for independent. So you get a little bit more if you're an independent student in loans. If you're a second year, you can get 6,500, or if you're independent, 10,500, and then junior senior year, you get 7,500 and then 12,500 if you're independent. And this is for the year, fall and spring. And then remember when we said that financial aid offers are generally for fall and spring and not summer? It's a little bit different with loan limits in that these are for summer as well. So if you're a student and you know you want to attend summer school, but you borrow all of your 5,500, you may not be able to have more for summer if your school counts summer at the end of the year, at the end of the academic year, which we do. Courtney, are you at the end of the fall, spring as well, a trailer?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. Some schools like KU Med is a summer header, which means summer starts the academic year. So if you were to borrow all of your 5,500 in the summer, that means you have nothing left for fall or spring. So it's important to get with the school to see, is this loan for just one semester, two summers included, and talk with your school about that because it can be different at every school. So I'd already mentioned the counseling. This is the website where it's at. It's studentaid.gov. And this is where the student would log in and click to complete entrance counseling and their annual student loan acknowledgement. So these are the two things, or the one thing at least a student will have to do the very first time they borrow loans. And then the annual student loan acknowledgement will be every single year if they decide to borrow loans. And then when they leave school, they have to complete exit counseling. So just know that everything that the student needs to do is on studentaid.gov. And this is the master promissory note as well, and a little screenshot of kind of what it looks like. So they do everything through this website. So let's talk about parent loans. This is only if your student is dependent, meaning you had to put your information on your student's FAFSA. So they're not independent, they're dependent. So as a parent of a dependent student, you are able to borrow a PLUS loan. Yay, you get to take on debt as well. How much fun is that? So what you'll want to do is when you're looking at the financial aid offer, sometimes if the school doesn't have grant aid, let's say you don't qualify for grants, then you'll see here's the cost of attendance, and then here's this giant parent loan that you can take out minus the student's 5,500. So you really have to look at the name of the loan because when I was working at KU, parents would see, oh, 40,000, cool. And it's a parent loan. And they don't really realize, oh, that's a loan that I have to pay back. So they really need to pay attention to the financial aid offers. So you can borrow a lot in a parent loan. Let's say the school's cost of attendance is $44,000, you could technically borrow $44,000 as a parent. You can borrow up to the cost of attendance for the institution. So who can borrow? Only biological or adoptive parents or step parents listed on the FAFSA. A step parent who is not on the FAFSA cannot borrow a parent loan, and also a grandparent, aunt, uncle, kid brother, they cannot do a parent loan either unless they are your biological or adoptive parents. They have to be biological or adoptive in order to do the parent loan. And then something new or something different about the parent loan is that remember the student loans you pay 6 months after you graduate or drop below half-time status or leave school. Parent loans are different. You start repayment within 60 days after the loan is fully dispersed. So if you borrow a loan that spans fall and spring, your first payment will be somewhere around March of that year because it fully dispersed in the spring semester. Let's say you only applied for a fall parent loan, then your parent loan would come due 60 days after that, which might be October. So you have to pay while your student is in school. You can request an in-school deferment, but that's not a great idea unless you really can't pay it because the interest accrues while the student's in school. So when they graduate, you have 4 years of interest accrual, and the loan is all of a sudden much, much, much larger than it started out. So you do need to pay it in school unless you request that deferment. Interest rates are a little lower this year than last year at 5.3%. And there is also an origination fee with this at 4% that just comes off the top of the loan for the fee. And this is a fun one. I took many, many calls where the parent would say, well, I'm going to borrow this first year, but then I'm transferring it to my student to pay back. They're going to be the ones paying it. And that's great, but they can't really legally do that. So you might have a verbal agreement with your student where they pay you and then mom and dad pay the parent loan, but the parent loan can never ever be legally transferred to a student. It will never be their responsibility. The parent always will have to pay it back. So while a parent can do a verbal agreement with the student to pay them back, really that parent's on the hook for it. And honestly, sometimes students can get private loans that might be better than a parent loan. So I would say if you're really wanting the debt to be in the student's name, it really just needs to be in the student's name if they can get a better deal. If they can't get a better deal, then you'll just have to hope that your student adheres by the rules that you set for them in terms of paying back the parent loan because it will always be in the parent's name. Now, parent loans do go through a credit check, so they hit your credit, and a parent cannot have adverse credit to borrow a parent loan. Generally speaking, we'll go through a list in just a second, but anything adverse like in collections or default could prevent you from getting a parent loan. But the government does allow a parent to have a cosigner. They call it an endorser. And if your cosigner or endorser is able to cosign for you, you could still potentially get a parent loan approved. There's also an option if you are denied a parent loan, your student can actually borrow some more money. So they can have the independent loan limit. So they can borrow an additional $4,000 to $5,000, which is great. But it depends on the type of institution. So that money gets you further if you're at a state school or in-state or community college than it would at a private school with a large price tag. So your aid can go further at different types of schools. Or if you've got a great scholarship at a private school, maybe it will go further there than at a state school. It just kind of depends what you've been offered. So generally speaking, you can't be delinquent or have any debts with an outstanding balance greater than that number on the screen here. You can't have anything in collections or charged off. You can't be default on your student loans. So if you're a parent, you went to school and you defaulted on your student loans, you cannot borrow a parent loan. Also, some debts in bankruptcy, if you're in wage garnishment, those kinds of things, you can't borrow a parent loan. Okay, so let's talk about private loans. So private loans are sometimes called alternative loans or supplemental loans, and they come from a private institution to help you cover your institutional costs. So a student may want to consider this if, let's say, their parent can't do a parent loan, or if they're trying to, pay for things themselves, or it's just not enough to cover their costs and they need a little bit of help. Private loans usually have the student as the borrower. So if the parent wants the student to really be taking on the debt, then the private loan could be an option for them. But Courtney said earlier, we really don't recommend private loans unless a student comes and talks to us. That would be the same. I think any financial aid administrator would tell you that because we want to make sure you're doing your federal loans first because they have way better forgiveness opportunities. For example, on a private loan, I always hear the news story of the student who passes away who has private loans and their cosigner is stuck on the hook paying them. That can be the case. So private loans don't have as many protections like that as the federal loans do. Also, there's forgiveness for federal loans, like if you're a teacher, if you teach math and science, if you work in the public service sector, then you can get loan forgiveness, whereas private loans don't quite have that yet. Now, colleges may have private loan programs where the school is the lender. I know from working at KU, we had the KU Endowment Association that would do small loans to students in the amount of $1,500 or $2,000 per semester, depending on what they needed, at like a 5% interest rate. So there are many things to consider when you choose a lender. So you want to know, what are the loan fees? The government charges that thing we just saw called an origination fee. Is there something similar with a private loan? I can tell you there is, but the fees are all going to be different. What is the interest rate? Is it variable? So does it change every year, or does the interest rate stay the same at 5%? Or is it going to go up to 12%? When do I have to start paying back? Do I have to start paying it now? Or do I start paying it back, after I graduate? And then do I have to be meeting progress standards at my school? So most schools require a student meet satisfactory academic progress, where we measure your GPA and the amount of classes you dropped. Who knew the financial aid office monitored that? So we do. We look and see, do you drop too many classes? Do you have below a certain GPA? And if you don't, you actually lose your financial aid. So will a private lender still lend to you if you're not meeting your school's standards? And then do I have to be full-time, part-time, however many hours to take, and what repayment options are available? Um, this doesn't have anything to do with this slide, but I want to mention real quick that you do not have to be full-time to get financial aid. And I'll repeat that. You do not have to be full-time to get financial aid. Most financial aid programs only require 6 hours of enrollment. Student loans only need 6 hours. Some grant programs only need 6. In fact, you can be in 3 hours and still get a Pell Grant if you are low enough for your expected family contribution. So you do not have to be enrolled full-time at your institution. We want you to be full-time as a freshman because we want to see you graduate in 4 years with minimal debt. But if life happens to you and you need to only be in 9 hours, that's okay. Now, for scholarships, you may check with your school because some scholarships are going to be required to be full-time. Sorry, that was kind of a tangent, but I wanted to kind of cover that since we get a lot of questions about that. This is a little tool I've used to compare some private student loans, so you can see that they're all going to be different. What this boils down to for the student is that they need to shop around. It's kind of like buying a car. There's no one place to buy a car. There's all these different places, right? So you have to go out to these individual websites and kind of search for private loans yourself. Some schools have preferred lender lists where they can give you an information sheet about the lenders that some of their students use. Most schools do have that, or some kind of resource they can direct you to. Courtney, do you have anything like that for private loans at WSU that you'd hand out to students?
So we actually have it on our website. We direct students to the website. Of course, we tell them we don't have any direct affiliation with the institutions, but these are just the ones that we know our students use frequently. And so we do lead them to our website. And then once they land on that page, it'll take them away from our website and then onto the various institutions that they may consult for a loan.
Great. Okay, so now I need to talk a little bit about college billing.
All right. So, of course, when they're enrolled in school, they're getting these direct costs. They're showing up on a billing statement. Bills are normally made available to them in July. Many times their financial aid award offer will tell them that they want to make sure all their financial aid is finalized by August 1st or even the end of July. So that way they're going into their school year and they're ahead of the game. And so, of course, it's important that they know about taking care of the billing aspects. There are a lot of things that can happen with their tuition and fees, with their not necessarily with their tuition and fees, but with their enrolled classes that are a result of them potentially not taking care of their college building. And so once these bills are made available, they'll be sent to them actually twofold. So they'll get a paper. Many times they'll get a paper letter with an outline of a bill, but they'll also receive something electronically, and it'll also be available for them when they sign into their student portal. They just need to be able to know, what they have opted into, and also where they can access that information. It's going to show them, as we have, talked throughout this presentation, it's going to show them their direct costs, but of course not their indirect costs, but they will always be able to know what those indirect costs are when they sign into their student portals. And then, we've already gone over what those direct costs are. It'll show them what financial aid that they have accepted and approved to be applied to their billing statement. It's not going to show them anything that they have not yet finalized. For example, if they've not completed the master promissory note or the entrance counseling for loans, then it will not show that that those amounts are subtracted from their balance. It also won't include the federal work study. And it'll show, of course, if they have a refund. Now, many times when we get to college building, this is where we promote direct deposit, especially in this pandemic where many institutions have received a lot of emergency funding and things like that. It's been really important that students are able to have direct deposit, because sometimes checks, students will get a check and they're not checking their mailboxes or whatever the case may be. And so a lot of times some of these checks have gone, they've gone untapped. They've not cashed the checks, and they've not even known that they're there because they haven't been checking their student account either. And so it's important, if they're setting up direct deposit, they can set up that e-refund account in their student portal, and that'll allow the institution to relay those funds directly to their personal bank account, which they've connected to their student account or set up in their student account. So many times when we look at billing, housing will be separate from their tuition and fees. Housing will be on its own payment plan, and tuition and fees will be on its own payment plan should the parents or should the student opt into setting up a payment plan with billing. But they'll definitely need to note what has been paid and what has not been paid. Oftentimes when a student is set up, like for example here at Wichita State, if a student is living on campus in housing, they will have 4 monthly payments that are due for their housing and meals, as opposed to with their tuition and fees. So they'll want to make sure what's been applied to their overall balance, what financial aid has been applied to their tuition and fees, as well as what financial aid has been applied to their housing and their meal plan. All right. So here, just some additional details. Students, since these bills are available in July, most times, students don't want to wait to orientation to figure out if they're going to attend the university, for example, because many times students have made the decision prior to orientation, which happens in the summer months. They've made the decision that, okay, we're going to go to this institution. They will have already received a financial aid award offer. They would have already received a billing statement. And really just making that decision during the summer kind of puts them at a disadvantage because they've not had an opportunity to plan, and to make arrangements to be able to take care of all of those costs that it may take to attend that institution. If they can't pay the full amount, they'll want to have these conversations. We say bringing it back to the dinner table, and really making a conscious plan. This is what we have. This is what we've been awarded from the various institutions. This is what we have out of pocket. And this is, and this is what we still have left to come up with. And so they'll need to make these plans, of course, prior to taking care of the bill. And just so that they're fully aware, because oftentimes, and I don't know about Johnson County, but I know at Wichita State, we've had a lot of times where we have these one-on-ones with families, and they were not aware at all what the complete costs were, what the direct costs were, what they were being billed, and it comes as a surprise. And that's not the conversation you want to have with a family that's attending college for a first time or something like that, because it really puts them at a disadvantage. And so we've been really intentional in making sure that they know, okay, this is where you go for your billing statement. This is where you go for that information. This is what you need to know to be prepared to step into college for the first time come August. Some things that they'll need to know, if they don't take care of billing, some institutions will drop them from their classes by a certain date. So
We
they'll want to
do.
make sure. Oh, you do?
We
Okay.
do.
We used to, but we actually allow them to maintain enrollment, which could mean if they never meant to stay enrolled in classes, that they now have a bill that they have to take care of. But we've also extended our recalculation date, or what some places call as census date, which is the date that their financial aid and their classes are kind of locked in place. And then reports are made to the census, or they're made to the government, about a student's enrollment and everything. So some will be charged late fees. If the bills aren't paid by that date, they may prevent them from enrolling in future semesters by putting a hold on their account or something like that. It'll also prevent them from adjusting potentially their current enrollment if they need to make a change in their classes or something like that. They could be removed from housing. More times than not, I think many institutions are accepting like prepayments, if you will, like a couple $100s as a down payment or something like that, which will hold the room for the students. But some institutions, they do not, and they may dismiss them from the housing, or the account is sent to a collection agency. Now, more times than not, this is after months of neglect, if you will. Let's say we're in the spring semester and their fall has not been paid. However, they were able to enroll for the spring, without paying for their fall. But in these cases, it'll be that their accounts may be sent to a collection agency. And then it's no longer in the hands of the institution. The student needs to work directly or one-on-one with the collection agency, and they're given all the information to make that change, or to be able to take care of that business. Different institutions will vary on how students are able to purchase their textbooks. Many are encouraged to pay out of pocket, and then whatever refund they may receive from their financial aid, they can kind of reimburse themselves. Some may have to wait until they get any potential refunds from their financial aid, so that they can make those payments or make those purchases. Some are able to charge it to their student account as like an advance, or if they have like a voucher for books or something like that, where they charge it to their school account and then the student is able to pay it. That kind of differs from institution to institution. I know at Wichita State, we years ago, they had a book voucher program, but it was far too expensive on the institution itself. And so they had to discontinue that. Since I've been a student, and that's back in 2003, they didn't even have the voucher program back then. Do they have it there at Johnson County?
No, so at KU, we dispersed 10 days prior to the start of class. So students usually have their financial aid refunds before classes started if they had their stuff done on time, and they could use their financial aid refund to purchase books. Then we started this thing with the bookstore where if you were in good standing, no, you didn't have a hold on your account, you could charge it to the bookstore and they would put it on your KU account and then allow your financial aid to pay for books. But at Johnson County Community College, we do a book advance. So we look at how much financial aid you have, subtract your charges, and then we load a specific amount onto your ID card for you to use at the bookstore. And then before we do refunds, we get the actual charges from the bookstore and we put actual charges on your account and then redo the whole refund process. So it's kind of sounds kind of complicated, but it's really not.
Yeah, Wichita State, they also receive their financial aid 10 days prior to the start of their program. And then they are able to, they're able to utilize whatever refund that they may have to purchase their textbooks. A lot of the orientation and the earlier presentations that we give, we really promote them if they have a summer job to save that $1,250 so that they're able to purchase their textbooks without consideration of their financial aid. And just quickly to cover a couple of resources as well, a net price calculator that's going to be available at each educational institution on their website. And this will allow you or allow your students to be able to go in and enter in their cost of attendance, enter in their estimated financial aid, and then they're able to calculate how much that they'll have potentially in any refunds, how much they're gonna have to pay out of pocket, you know, and things like that. So this is a really good resource that a lot of pretty much all of the institutions use. And then, oh, is this still me, Danielle?
Yeah.
Okay, I think it went one too far. Okay, all right. And then My College Money Plan, this is a good tool for you, for your students to be able to download. They can enter in their tuition, their fees, their books and supplies, enter in their both indirect and direct costs. And then that way they can also write down their family resources. They can write down whatever money they have in savings account, whatever scholarships they've received, any other aid, and any other resources that they may have. So that way they can be intentional about planning for their first year. And really, students do this every year. It helps them to establish a budget, and it helps them be accountable for whatever extra monies that they may have, and be able to be intentional about making sure that their educational costs are taken care of first.
I'll go back one.
Oh, okay. Do you not see the resources college scorecard?
Not quite yet.
Okay.
There we go. There it is.
All right, perfect. And then last but not least from me, we have the college scorecard. So this is a nice tool for your students and families to be able to utilize to compare institutions that they may be interested in. So they can go in and they can enter in their institutions, and they can do a side-by-side of what, as you see here, their average annual costs, what the graduation rate of that institution is, what the salary is going to be for potential graduates from that institution. And then they can kind of compare. This will help them in understanding their financial aid award offers and comparing those as well. Because if they have, let's say they want to attend the University of Kansas, you know, and their salary is going to be good. Their graduation rate is pretty decent, but maybe they're not receiving the financial aid award offer that they would be at an Allen County Community College when you compare to all the costs that are going to be made, or all the expenses that are going to be needed to be met out of pocket. You know, for example, then this college scorecard really helps in that process as well. And I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you, Courtney. Another great resource. So we've shown you the net price calculator, which students can do now if they want to, but they might have already received their financial aid offers, but students can do that anytime. They can do their My College Money Plan. They can go out and start looking at this stuff now. It's a good resource for your juniors as well. So this is a resource specific to the state of Kansas, which I love. It's through the Kansas Board of Regents website. You can link to it from there, but I've put the link on the slide. You can actually go in and pick a specific degree program at a specific college, and it will tell you what the total annual cost is going to be, the cost over 2 years if it's a 2-year program, or the cost over 4 years if it's a 4-year program. You can put in your scholarships and grants and loans and other funding sources to kind of get at your total investment or your total net costs. And then the really cool thing that I like about it is that it gives you earnings information. So it tells you after you complete, and I've got KCKCC pulled up for their associate's degree, what you could earn after you graduate, and then after 5 years of graduating. And you can put in, it's program specific. So if you want to major in aerospace engineering at KU, you can actually go in and put in aerospace and it will give you all of the program cost information. So it's a really, really good tool, and it's only for schools within the state of Kansas. So it's not going to give you schools in other states. And then this is the most important resource for students because this is where they have to go to do everything. So they can't get through the financial aid process without coming here. This is where the FAFSA is, your FSA-ID, your master promissory notes we talked about, loan counseling, all here. So students need to remember their FSA-ID and password to be able to log on to this website and do everything that they need to do to get completed in the financial aid process. And then this is a great resource for you all. I like using this because every year they put out the FAFSA screenshots. So they'll put all like 100 slides of the FAFSA for an independent and dependent student. And I've got actual screenshots that I can use during a presentation. I'll have my mobile app FAFSA screenshots. They've got social media postings that you can use for your school. If you wanted to put out a quick tweet about financial aid, they have all of these resources listed on this page that you can just borrow and use for whatever you want. They also have high school financial aid night toolkits and everything. So this is a great resource for people who work with high school juniors and seniors, or even younger. So we've gone over pretty much the whole kind of financial aid process from start to finish. Does anyone have any questions? We finished right at 3. We were worried. While I'm waiting for questions, I do want to say there is an evaluation. This is our first foray into Zoom workshop. So if you like this format, definitely let us know if you'd like to keep maybe some in person next year and some Zoom. I know I've really enjoyed presenting on this platform, although it can present some technological challenges, but it's nice to do it from home, right? You can be home doing this. So I know I've really enjoyed it. So please give us your feedback and what kind of you're looking for training next year, because we really read through all of these evaluations and we try to do what you all are needing us to do as your colleagues. Are there any questions in the chat at all, Whitney?
I'm seeing no questions. I did see a comment in here that asking if the PowerPoint was available to us. It is linked as a PDF out on the CASPA website, and I put that in the chat box earlier. We don't have the actual PowerPoint out there. If that's something specifically that you're wanting, we could probably get that to you if Danielle is okay with that.
Yeah, I can share that. I can email it to you, Whitney.
Okay.
And that can be put out on the CASPA website as well. And the session is recorded. So if you've got friends who missed today, forgot to mention that at the beginning, the recording will be posted as well.
Yes, we do want to say thank you for the flexibility. The weather and power outages caught us all a little off guard when we were scheduled to start this. So if it's not one thing, it's another, and we're just going to roll with it, right? So thank you for your flexibility. I'm not seeing any questions out here, so I guess we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, we'll hang on for a little bit longer if you did want to ask us in private. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming and have a great week, everyone.